everyone. In the last episode, we learned that we already have what it takes to help others.
If we understand what we have and we're willing, we can make it available to others in times of need.
Talking about others, being a disaster-ready church will require us to be present in our communities. And not just that, get to know them in a level that would enable us to serve them better.
Guys, we're halfway there. Today we will talk about the third step of being a disaster-ready church, and that is My Team. That's why join us today for another interesting episode, only here on
ADRA
TV.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Disaster Ready Church. Just to recap, we've already covered my church and my community and the steps you can take as a local church or faith group to first understand the capacities of your church and to also systematically understand the capacities within your community.
And today's topic is on My Team.
Yes, and speaking of my team, there's a phrase, there's a very famous a line, no man is an island, which means no one can get anything done alone, everybody. It is very important for us to have a team. One of the benefits is that when we build a team, we can depend on numbers. Obviously, whenever there's something that we have to lift that is heavy, we would need more than one person. And that is what we get when we get a team together. And also, because not every person thinks alike and everyone brings different ideas and thoughts, this is very important if we want to make progress. And Ben Carson, who's very famous, he said, if there are two people who think alike, one person is irrelevant.
So true. I would also like to add that different team members could have different personalities that would help in the work and that we do or have to do during a disaster. Some are naturally kind and loving and would be great to talk and support those in need. Others are very logical and direct, and they might make good decision makers.
Yeah, another word comes to mind, competencies. We all bring different skills to the table, just like the four of us do. And in the same way, at our local church, different church members bring different competencies to the table. And that's really important because we can work together to provide a better service to those that we are here to support.
Yes, but guys, everybody that's here, like Shaina, Prabhuk, and KJ, there are two words that are used when it comes to a collection of people. So we have the word group, and then we also have the word team. Are they the same?
Not at all. A group is a collection of people, but a team is a collection of people with specific skills, with a purpose and targets to meet within a timeline. A team is more intentionally set up to achieve something specific or has a goal.
Correct. And this is why we called this episode My Team and not My Group or My Clique or, the different terms that you might use, right? So it's My Team because the purpose is to put together a team, intentionally put together a team with complementing skills who can get something done within a given timeline.
Oh, so now it's a... Sorry. Ako no? Ay, sorry. Now it's a... Wait.
Yeah.
So
now it's a bit clearer, which means the church emergency response team.
Yeah, balik ko ya. Ako na lang sa ako. Oh, so now it's a bit clearer, which means in our church emergency response team, we will have specific roles that they play and specific responsibilities, right?
Correct.
So what are the roles that will be played by these team members?
Well, let me answer that question with a question.
Okay.
Okay? So maybe we can brainstorm a little bit and understand what type of tasks need to get done during a disaster.
Okay.
But it depends on what the church would want to do, maybe, or at least somewhat. So, for example, a church might want to use their kitchen to provide meals to people who are suffering from a lack of food in a disaster, or they might be giving food to volunteers. But they also might do something completely different, like they might be providing hygiene kits, and the tasks that need to be done might be a little different, but I suppose there's still some things in common, right? Like you'll still always need to do some purchasing, give some instructions to your volunteers to make sure they're safe, organise some transport, talk to the local government, those kind of things.
Don't forget, you may need someone that is necessary to write reports or even write a proposal.
If needed. But what about overall leadership, guys? We need to have some leader, right?
Correct. And you also need someone like Judas.
What? Judas? Like Judas in the Bible?
In
Judas,
the Bible,
the notorious disciple of Jesus.
Of course, But let's not forget that Judas was actually the finance manager of the disciples. So you need someone to manage the finances as well, preferably someone without the true characteristics of Judas, right? Okay, so if we look at this as a whole, we can actually identify that there needs to be 9 core functions that needs to be fulfilled during a disaster. So in ADRA, we have something called the emergency response teams. We call them emergency response teams, and they are put in place to fulfill these 9 functions.
Okay.
Let's look at the 9 functions here. Let's discuss it a little bit. And we would like to actually present this to churches to decide on how they want to structure their churches or their emergency response team. So these are the 9 functions, and I'll read them out. Of course, we need a team leader, which is an ERC. I've played the role of ERC in many different settings, and it's a very interesting role to play. Shaina is the ERC of ADRA in the Philippines, and it's actually a unique role because in Asia, we have ERCs in different ADRA country offices, but it is a unique situation where we have a full-time ERC in the Philippines because they respond to so many disasters that you need someone really dedicated to build the capacity to keep in touch with the churches, other organizations, and also to lead with more than 10 disasters responses per year, so that's a large number. We also need someone to help with the planning. And let me clarify this. When we use the word planning, it talks about conducting needs assessments, writing proposals, managing different donor communications, this is the role when we say planning. Then of course we need someone to implement what has been planned. We use the word a program manager or program coordinator, but it is more or less someone who implements, right? And have you all implemented a program during a disaster at some point? I think, KJ?
Myself, not yet. No,
Oh,
not
okay.
during a disaster. We talk about these roles in our workshops when we're empowering those local churches to do it, but myself, not yet.
Chantal, I think even though you are not typically the person to actually implement a program, I think you've been thrown into a position once in the past to implement, right?
Yes. Dinagat Island, Typhoon Odette, that was like very significant.
And you were stuck on that island implementing
Yes,
the program,
and
right?
spent Christmas and New Year there and all. But it was, I mean, this position, this function, this is not easy. Like you have to be ready to meet like all of a sudden instances, like unexpected circumstances. But then you get it, you then roll away, and then you have also colleagues that you can talk to. And
And it becomes sometimes a very stressful job, because you are on the
That's the
field
right
and-
word.
Yeah, right. So, then of course we have people who can support us with logistics, organizing the transport, the procurement, and all of that. And we also have, in ADRA, we call them the human resource manager, but we have found out that in the church setup, we have volunteer managers. But basically someone to fulfill the administrative and even the clerical tasks of getting people on board, the human resources on board, and planning the transitions, okay? Of course, we need a finance manager. Communications is a very important role, and Chantal, I think you play a major role in communications, right?
Yeah, so, and I'm so blessed. We're blessed here in the Philippines because we have a tight partnership with Hope Channel Philippines and South and here also. So whenever we're out and we have to send a story or take photos and all, we can get this across, especially that we have donors, especially our responses. We have donors and they want to see what's happening in the field. So we want to be as quick as possible. So we have to set really somebody that is in charge in communication and then make sure she or he has what it needs to get this message across. So a team would be preferable also.
Right. Just going back to the volunteer management, I remember an experience I had when I was deployed in Palu, Indonesia. Shout out to all those amazing volunteers. They had almost, I think, 60 or 70 volunteers around the ADRA office. And there were so many volunteers, and actually at the start of the program, there was very little to do because people were mostly planning. So we had an amazing group of volunteers sitting there with their guitars, singing songs, and you know, it really lightened the mood. So but at the same time, managing a large group of volunteers, especially when they're youth, also could be a challenge. So you really need someone who can do that. Then the other one is, of course, safety and security. This is a very important part. Oftentimes when you respond, you are throwing yourself into that danger zone, right? So you need to have someone who is very objective and who can actually advise and guide the team in setting up certain safety protocols at a time like that. And we also have something called the pastoral and psychosocial support. We know that responding in disasters is very taxing. People get very tired. At the same time, they are traumatized themselves. And it's very important to have someone who could come back, who these people could come back and talk to and share their experiences. You know? And just to give a final note on this, it's important to understand that you may not need 9 people to do these 9 tasks.
So
right?
it's not given that one function, then one person.
Ideally, depending on the size of your response.
Okay.
Right? So Shaina, I think you are the ERC, but then also you go and act as the program manager also in sometimes, going and doing the distributions. And Shaina sometimes also does the planning. So all 3 in one. Okay. If it is a small response. But if it's a larger response, then of course you need to have a person dedicated. And you may have more than one person taking care of one function. You might have 1 or 2 logistics people, right? But generally, the ERC function is headed by just one person so that you have unity of command. Yeah.
Also, the church may decide not to have some rules. For example, if you don't need to write a proposals, then you may not need someone like a planning manager. So this team can be customized or modified.
Okay, but there must be some roles that are critical, right? That we can work out with the churches at their local context.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are some important things I imagine to note about this structure, and please help me check my understanding against those of you in the Philippines who use this, you know, more frequently than I have in my experience. So my understanding is that it's based on a model that is globally recognized as good practice, and I know that from talking to people in Australia who work in, say, the fire department or in ambulances, that they actually use a similar structure in the government services there and in other places in the world. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So in ADRA, the emergency response team is one component of what we call the Emergency Response Management System, or ERMS, since we like acronyms in the NGO sector. And it was actually designed based on the Incident Command System from the US. And it has really worked well, and ADRA uses it quite a bit to set their teams in place.
Yeah, great. And I heard you saying before that we think about these as functions rather than people. So the boxes on the diagram, and if you see on the screen, you might see a diagram. Those boxes relate to a function, not necessarily a person. So as you said, we don't necessarily need 9 people just because there are 9 functions. If you have a small team, then one person might cover 2 or 3 of those functions at the same time. Or if you have a big team, then you can allocate more than one person to a particular function. So you might have a lot of volunteers in a really big response and have more than one person leading them as their volunteer manager.
Just if I may add to that, KJ, and I would say it is at the discretion of the church leadership or the leadership of the faith group to identify the skills and allocate these roles initially, right?
Yes.
So you need to be very intentional when you allocate these roles. You need to see how best to match the competencies and the personality of the person. If someone is not really outgoing and really can't handle a lot of stress, and we have brothers and sisters like that, then they might not be the best people to be the program managers, to go and work, live in a tent for a few days and to implement a program, right? But they might be really good in writing a report and staying back. Each role is equally important, right? So it doesn't have to be a hierarchy necessarily. There is a reporting structure, of course, in place, but it needs to be done carefully, but then also you can spend some time to build their capacity once you identify them. Right?
Okay. Because I was like, a question be like, what if we cannot see them here? Like that these functions, they sound like really hard and in our church. What if it's not here? How do we, or do we just pick somebody and yeah, you do that and also, and then you said build the capacity also.
Yeah, so if we know who we have available, we can give training to them to improve their capacity, or we might find that there are gaps. If we're just a small church and we don't have anyone who's really suited to handling the finances, for instance, that's when you can call your local ADRA office and they might know someone else who can step in and fill that gap so that you don't have gaps in your team. One other thing is that having a clear structure enables you to work across different groups and across different countries. I know from talking to people who work in our office that have been deployed overseas to help an ADRA team over there, as long as everyone knows what their function is and what that function does, they can work together really well in a new context, even if they're not really familiar and friends or have worked together in the past. So that's really nice. Have you seen that at work in ADRA?
I mean, I think ADRA does it quite well overall, regionally and also globally. I think other NGOs do it well too. There are some governments that also have great structures in place, specifically when it comes to ADRA's emergency response teams. A lot of resources and time is put into training, first identifying and training people. So ADRA has something called the emergency response team rosters, which is managed regionally and globally. So in the Asia roster, we have about 28 right now, professionals, ADRA staff from the country offices in Asia who have been trained and who are good at being planning managers or programs people or communication. So if a country office cannot handle the response, if it is too overwhelming, it has surpassed their capacity to respond, then we can send people in there. And the roles are well structured. So if we would deploy someone like, maybe if I use a name, Rajan, who is currently the programs director of ADRA Myanmar, who would go as a planning manager to the Philippines, he would know exactly what to do. He's been trained, right? So it's very clear who he reports to and what he would do. So this is, we have these systems in place, and we deploy people all the time. So there was a lot of ERT members from Asia who went to support the intervention in Ukraine, for example. So the emergency response team members travel all around the world, supporting country officers.
Prabhu, could I ask you a question about this team? Like if I was at a local church in Australia, do I need to have all the names down for those 9 roles already ahead of time? Like when do we actually pull this team together?
So I think it's important that, it's a very important question that you have brought up. We hope we can address this in the next episode a little bit better. But ideally, the churches should have these roles identified long before a disaster. And this is the whole point of the disaster ready church. You are ready already. So it's important to look at the functions, identify church members who could fulfill this role, put them in a structure, let them know that this would be their role when it comes, to a disaster. The manual that will be out in 2024 will have job descriptions, suggested job descriptions for each of these functions, and they could pick them up and train the people who are going to be playing those roles. Now, if you get in touch with an ADRA office in your country, they will be also able to provide these trainings, and I would even say provide an opportunity to respond together with ADRA to learn something like a short internship so that the capacity goes down to the churches.
Wow.
Okay, so we have a list of people that are trained for each of the particular roles, and then in the actual event of a disaster, the leader, so say like Shayna in the Philippines, will put together the people that she needs to fill those roles, however many people that is, and then they start acting. And how long does that go for? Like, does the team, will we always need that team together? Or like what happens when the disaster has passed and we're now in the recovery part?
So as part of the recovery part, there should ideally be a debriefing, which again there'll be some guidance notes on the manual that will come out in 2024 on how to do this debriefing. You should ideally have this discussion with the team that has now responded to see whether they were comfortable in the roles and what are the skills they would need to respond in the future, or to even see whether they want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
I've come across several people who've come to the emergency response team trainings and said, I really love the training, but I don't want to do this. Okay, and they're trained and they go back and they're more effective than before, yes, but they don't want to be part of the emergency response team. They just feel it's not for them, they can't handle the stress. But ideally, if the members that were selected at the start can continue, it's very good because they build on the experience.
Yes.
But if someone wants to leave, then there has to be a plan to replace them.
Okay.
Now, of course, each of the churches can decide the best structure based on their context. And here in the Philippines, we've been working with our partner, the ACS, Adventist Community Services, and we've agreed on some changes. And Shaina, do you want to run us through some of the changes that we discussed, just as an example to our viewers?
Yes. While working with the ACS directors in the Philippines, we noticed that they wanted to have a uniform name for the response teams, especially in SPC and in PUC. They decided to call the ACS response team as ACSERT or ACS ERT. They also said that instead of the HR function, they want to have volunteer coordinators. They also identified that Hope Channel will assist more on the outward communication. KJ, how about in Australia?
I know at the country level, so like in ADRA Australia, we use the structure pretty much exactly as is in our plans. When we're training our local churches, also we recommend that same structure for the different functions to cover in the emergency response team. We give a recommendation that a local church, if they've only got one pastor, that they don't make that person the leader, the coordinator of the emergency response team, just so that they are more free to be able to provide that pastoral psychosocial support that's so important to take care of the well-being of the volunteers who are acting in those roles.
So just like this, like the examples that were shared, faith groups could decide for themselves on the best structure that suits them. I think the faith groups also should decide what type of intervention they could do. So going back to something that was mentioned earlier, if the church or the faith group wants to run a kitchen, they might not need to have the full structure in place. In fact, the leader could be a chef, right? So I don't want to limit it too much by giving many examples, but then it depends on the intervention that the church wants to do. And we are not encouraging churches and faith groups to take up more than what they can handle. Do what you can, right? So the whole purpose of this training is to identify your capacity and to do what you can. Even though financially it might be small, you might feel it's small, but you never know the type of impact it can have. So structure it based on your need. ADRA officers should be able to help you with that.
Yes, and while we're talking, I just remember how Jesus did it also. He made a team. Like he chose 12, I believe, right? Yeah. Except for what Judas said. But initially, he handpicked people to be on his team to serve a purpose, a specific purpose. And at the start, they were like, but they were willing to join and be involved in that mission. And I think our faith groups, our churches, I think we're good at building teams also. And we have to practice building teams, and especially in disaster-ready churches.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, KJ, before we go into the discussion on the code of conduct, I think, so going back to how Jesus selected the teams. Jesus selected them not because of the capacity they had, but because he saw the potential of what they could be. Okay, so if you feel that the church or your faith group really doesn't have the capacities, don't say we don't have it. Look at the youth, look at the other members in your church, and try to see whether you can pick their potential in the future.
Yes.
So that this becomes also an opportunity to grow.
Yes.
Okay. So, Shaina, I mean, if you have youth in your church who would like to engage in this could actually lead them to select a career in emergency response one day. So you never know. There's so many benefits out of this.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely. And whatever structure we use to organize at that church level, we need to make sure that the people who are involved in helping are acting with integrity, who are behaving in a way that builds trust with our partners and with the people that we're helping. And especially when we're helping vulnerable people, we have to make sure that we protect them, right? And to make sure of this, we follow a code of conduct. Now, this code of conduct is based on a code of conduct written by the International Federation of the Red Cross, and it has 10 statements, which are like guiding principles for humanitarian work.
Okay.
Now, these 10 principles, this statement is kind of like the gold standard in the global humanitarian community. There are over 600 organizations that are signatories of this code of conduct. And because it's shown to be effective and useful in ensuring our principles are high when we're helping people in need. So ADRA as an organization is a signatory of this code of conduct that we're going to be talking about, as well as ACS is also a signatory.
Wow, a code of conduct, guys. I think, and everybody that's watching, I think we should spend more time to crack this code. Yes. Delivered it well. Dana?
Yes, let's crack the code and understand it better together.
We cannot emphasize it enough that this code of conduct is so important to abide by no matter what group you represent.
Okay, so let's get into these 10 statements. So I will be reading them out, and then we will try to figure out, so specifically from you guys, what each means. So let's start with number 1. The humanitarian imperative comes first. KJ?
Yeah, that word humanitarian talks about the value of human life. It's about alleviating human suffering wherever we find it because we value people. And actually, this is a biblical principle too, right? We are made in God's image and there is value in people. And so we have a responsibility to help them wherever they are when they're suffering, particularly when disasters strike.
Okay, and second, aid is given regardless of race, creed, or nationality of the recipient and without adverse distinction of any kind. Shaina, can you tell us more about this?
This means we are not biased in the way we give aid. Human lives are precious no matter what you look like, no matter which country you are from, no matter where you are part of a political group, no matter if you are male or female, no matter if you eat pork or not, no matter if you had a nice house before it was destroyed in a flood, no matter if you have a good sense of humor or not, no matter if you can speak a certain language, none of these matters, and we shouldn't be biased in the way we give aid. If a person is in need and we have the resources to help, we should help them.
Oh, that's very clear. Thank you, Shaina. And third, Sir Prabhu, can you tell us more about this statement? It says, aid priorities are calculated on the basis of need alone.
On need alone. So yesterday we talked about the principle of not assuming that you know, right? So we're talking about churches within a community. You might feel you know what the community needs. However, it's always encouraged that proper needs assessments are conducted. Okay, so let me give you an example. If a community says they are comfortable, so if a church is ready to run a kitchen, let's go back to that example, and the community says they are comfortable in eating fish, for example, it may not be the case that they like canned fish, right? They might completely reject it because they're used to something else. Okay, so it's very important to have proper systematic needs assessments done, and we respond based on those assessments so that we meet the need.
Yes, and I remember, this is a biblical example. I remember Jesus when he was walking down and there was a blind man. I forgot his name. It's found in Mark 11. And then he asked the man, "What would you like me to do for you?" And so then he said, "Please heal me, and then so that I can see again." And then Jesus gave that. So even him knowing everything would ask that question. So us, we should never assume, always ask that question. Now, fourth, this is a very interesting statement. KJ, aid will not be used to further a particular political or religious standpoint. We shall endeavor not to act as instruments of government foreign policy.
Yeah, to understand this one, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had someone help you, but there were some strings attached?
Yeah.
How did it feel? Did it feel good?
Feels so bad.
It doesn't feel good. And when someone has ulterior motives, you can feel it, you know. And what if we went to someone who was in need and we said, "Hey, I have what you need, but you have to think like I do. You have to believe the way I believe, or you have to join the political party that I'm a part of before you can have what it is you need." And it's not going to feel good. And that's manipulative, really, isn't it? And Jesus never manipulated people into trusting him.
Wow.
He worked for their good. He followed, the principles of giving them a free choice. And so as Christians, if we're following Jesus, we can't force our beliefs on people that we are helping. The very act itself of helping someone is a witness to God's character and the fact that he is loving and compassionate and just. So yeah, in this space, we have to be careful as Christians in the way we do it. You know, in that moment of need, maybe it's not the time for a sermon. Maybe they need a blanket rather than a Bible. You know, maybe they need a hot chocolate and someone to listen to their story rather than a sermon. And so there's a time for everything, but we can't force what we believe on other people or use it as a criteria when we're helping people.
Yes.
I think we can elaborate a little bit more. And see, these 10 codes of conduct are interlinked, right? So what if we have a group of donors, individuals, getting together and saying, here's some money, but this should reach, yes, we know all of these people are affected, but this is for that specific audience. Then it becomes a problem as well. You know why? Because we are supposed to respond based on needs alone, right? So then it becomes an issue. So it's in real life, this actually becomes a problem depending on the different requirements of the donor. So you need to be mindful that this is the code of conduct, and the churches, faith groups that actually plan to respond need to honor it.
Yes, and this can be not just like a code of conduct because you join an emergency response team, but this can be a way of life. Like something that you would want to like adapt and personally. I mean, this is a really good principle also to uphold. Now, fifth,
Wait,
yes.
Can I say one more thing
Sure.
before you go on? Just one practical way that we can avoid being influenced by people that have an agenda, whether they're donors or whatever, is making sure that our income, sources of income are from a variety of donors. You know, use multiple sources for your income, whether you're a local church or whether you're a global organization like ADRA. If you do that, then you're less likely to be pressured into using it in a particular way. And obviously when we advertise, you know, hey, we need funds for a particular cause, that's different. Like, you know, we respect the wishes of the donors and use that money in the way that they've, you know, said they wanted it to be used. But, you know, if we can maintain our independence and then we can act respecting the principles of the code of conduct, that's the best way.
Yes, thanks, KJ. Now, I believe our viewers that are listening right now, there are things that we want to keep on here being involved in the Disaster Ready Church, we're learning things and we're also unlearning a lot of things to be effective in serving others. Now, fifth statement in the Code of Conduct, Shaina, we shall respect culture and customs.
Yes, people from different places like to do things differently, and what feels like respectful interaction to a person from one culture might be offensive to someone from a different culture. We need to be aware that not everyone thinks the same as us, and be careful not to make assumptions. We try to help someone the way they want to be helped because that will feel loving to them. If you have people from various cultures in your church family, this is a strength because they may have language skills and cultural awareness that will enable your team to help people in a disaster in a more thoughtful and useful way.
Wow.
Can I give an example of one of the great ideas that came out of one of the workshops we did in Australia? They looked at their congregation and realised they were really multicultural and that there were youth and young people in their church that have language skills that could be used in the event of a disaster to help people in their community who might have a language barrier or, you know, might like to be helped in a certain way. And so that, that cultural understanding is super valuable.
Even going down to the details of how you dress when you go to the response, right? So you might be really comfortable wearing shorts and skinny. It's a hot day to respond, but is it really culturally appropriate to dress that way, right? You know, so for example, in my country, Sri Lanka, you can wear a cap, but if you speak to an adult, you would remove. So it's good to have that understanding. Now, we're talking about local communities here, and I believe they will have a very good understanding on the local culture and customs, and I think they would be in a better position to adapt.
Yes. I have one experience wherein it was a implementation of a response, and then I had to wear hijab, I believe, because
to cover your head.
Yes, to cover my head and my hair, and then that's how we respect, no? And that's how we want to, because we're mingling with them. We're talking with leaders and all, so it's more acceptable in the community.
Yeah, I was also just going to say, even people that sound like you, look like you, may have a slightly different culture because of their generation, like being older or younger, or where you live. Even say, for example, within Australia, there's a slightly different culture in the city as opposed to, you know, the outback and in country places. So being aware of those differences and not making assumptions is important, like asking the people you're helping, how would you like me to help, like Jesus did.
Yes, thank you, KJ. Now, 6, Prabuk, we shall attempt to build disaster response on local capacities. What does that mean? So
if you remember in our last episode, we spoke about doing the self-assessment of the church or the faith group and then also assessing the community. And we said we need to identify the strengths that we have, things that the resources that we can utilize. This 6th point actually brings that out, where we should build on local capacity. We need to understand that there is capacity already in that setup. And oftentimes, local people know how to solve their own problems. So we are here only to strengthen and support that process, not to weaken it, right? So let's bring in a little bit a more practical example. What if you decide to respond by providing hygiene kits? Let's say soap. If you bring a lot of soap to provide to all the community from outside, you might actually destroy that local economy. The shops that actually have large stocks might not be able to sell that for a long period of time. And this might become a big issue. So by trying to support the people in distress unintentionally, you are actually having a negative impact on the local economy. So it's very important for us to make sure that we build on local capacity. Again, this is information that you would gather during your needs assessment, trying to identify whether the markets are active. In many cases now, the NGO sector, the humanitarian sector as a whole is moving towards cash response because we feel that is more relevant because you give the decision-making power to the people affected and they could look at how best to use it within that given environment. Of course, cash should be given if it is feasible and accepted quite well, you know, and if not, you should go for something else. But,
okay, thank you very much. And seventh, KJ, ways shall be found to involve program beneficiaries in the management of relief aid.
Yeah, this kind of relates to exactly to what Prabuk was saying just now about involving the local people, because it's often the local people that have the best understanding to solve their problems. And we should never impose our assistance on those people, because to be effective and for it to be lasting and, you know, to really make a difference, we need to be giving them choices as well as it just feels better for them to be involved in the design, in the management, in the implementation. It gives them that sense of control when you feel like you've lost control in a situation of a disaster.
Yes. And second to the last, eighth one. Relief aid must strive to reduce further vulnerabilities to disaster as well as meeting basic needs.
Our actions affect the prospects of the community for long-term development, either in a positive or a negative way. Recognizing this, we will strive to implement relief programs which actively reduce their vulnerability to future disasters and help create sustainable lifestyles. We try to look after the environment and take into account environmental concerns. We will also try to minimize the negative impact our assistance might have by avoiding long-term dependence by the community on external aid.
Thanks, Shaina. And second to the last, Prabuk, we hold ourselves accountable to both those we seek to assist and to those from whom we accept resources.
So this statement brings out three parties, if you look at it very carefully. You have the donor, you have the person who implements, and then you have the person who receives. Okay, so it's basically touching these three. Now, if as the church, as ADRA, as the NGO, as the faith group that implements, is in the middle. We receive resources from one side and we disperse it or we assist on the other side, right? So now, usually there's a higher level of accountability that the donors request. Okay, we are supporting you, give us a report. Let us know how it went. So there's automatically some level of accountability that comes in place. So you would actually report back, even if it is a small donation from an individual, you will have the ethical responsibility to report back to say, this is what we did with your money. Now, you need to be honest in doing that report. There's been many times that I've myself been involved where we have made some mistakes during the response, but we've been very honest in reporting to say, this is what we planned, but we really couldn't achieve this. It's better to be honest, right? My mother used to say, an honest 0 is better than a cheated 100. Right? So this is now bringing another dimension to this discussion. People who are in distress often do not have the capacity to hold us accountable sometimes because they are in distress, they are focused on the loss that they have experienced, and the last thing they have on their mind is to validate or to vet the assistance they receive. That is when this statement becomes really powerful, where we hold ourselves accountable, where we put in mechanisms where they could give proper feedback and they could question us as a church group, as ADRA, as the faith-based organizations on what was delivered to them. There are many mechanisms and, you know, we don't have time to cover all of it.
Yes.
But the point is that we have to hold ourselves accountable to that higher standard, to provide answers if they are asked.
Yeah, and like we talked about being honest and being transparent. I believe being involved in Disaster Ready Church really changes you and makes you a better person. And lastly, everybody, in our information, publicity, and advertising activities, we shall recognize disaster victims as dignified human beings and not hopeless objects. So disasters impact our minds and mess up how we see ourselves, our identity, and even our worth. And this is where us, the responders, where our words and our action towards them really matter. Like for ADRA, we take seriously the practice of asking for consent when we take photos or videos. We want to make sure that we ask for permission if they'd allow us, and not just that, if they'd allow us for it to be used in publicly. And then also, we are very careful in how we use our camera angles. So there are some angles like the high angle, top angles that we want to, it shows or it communicates that our human subject are little or poor and needy. So we want to be careful with that. And there was a note here also that instead of calling those who have been affected victims, we call them survivors. We want also, through our words, we want to avoid for them to get hurt, but we can use words also that can empower them and going and navigating through what just happened to them. So those are the 10, yes, Prabhu?
Just to build on that,
yes?
Chantal, this is something that I think churches may have challenges with the youth groups, you know, because nowadays everyone is in social media, right? Is it ideal to go and respond and do something really well in the community, but then also at the same time have a post on your social media platform saying like chilling while responding or something like that, you know? It's not. This is, I think, covered here, and it brings it to the current context. So it is not advisable. We have to pay respect. This is a very dignified task, and we need to make sure that the people who are affected are dealt with a lot of love and respect.
Yes, and I just realized you have this team, you have this capacities, and like you have the available for people to give and serve, and then the quality of assistance that you're giving depends a lot on the kind of people that's involved in the response also.
We want to be the kind of people that don't see ourselves as up here and the people that we're helping down here, but we see ourselves as equal, you know, and we really give them, you know, a dignified, you know, response in the way we respond, because they won't always be vulnerable necessarily, and we will always, you know, we ourselves will be vulnerable when we're older if we're not now, and you know, we're all the same in God's eyes.
Amen. And so to close our thank you, everybody. I think that was really clear and understandable, in view of our viewers. And now we would like to close our episode today. I'd like to ask you your takeaways. What's something that you'd like to leave with our viewers for these episodes? Our viewers, Shaina?
For me, the importance of having a team and giving each team member the specific function and work together and achieve a specific goal.
KJ?
For me, it was cracking that code and understanding that we have to behave in a way that builds trust and that protects people that are vulnerable, and that we can see ourselves as equal to them in the way we do that.
Yes.
I want to leave behind a word, adaptability. To look at all of this theory, to look at the manual when it is out, and then to adapt it based on your context.
Yes, and for me, I'd like to leave a challenge with the code of conduct, the things that we discussed today. I mean, go to your Bibles, like for churches that are listening right now, and then validate it if it's biblical and all, and you will be amazed how actually the things that we've discussed are in the Bible. Thanks, everybody. And so we'd like to thank some and leave these messages like Shaina.
Remember, we must be #Disaster Ready Church, and we can be by making ourselves and what we have available. It starts with that.
And our ADRA family is here to help you if you're wanting to become a disaster-ready church. You know, reach out to the local ADRA leaders in your area so they can give you a hand. And also, thank you once again very much to the Hope Channel team in the Philippines here. We really appreciate what you're doing to make this information available to people wherever they are in the world.
Thank you also to ADRA Australia, who has helped us with this program, who put this program in place initially, actually. And also, in the context of the Philippines, huge thanks to all the ADRA.
Yes, and now everyone, guys, we're down to our last step. What were the 4 steps again? My church, my community, my team, and my response. So we talked about my church already, my community, and just today, my team. And next time, everyone, I'd like to invite you, we will be discussing about my response. And that will be really interesting. And that's why I see you again, only here on ADRA TV.